Hello, everybody. My name is James Lindsay. I'm the publicist at Coach House Books. Welcome to the launch for Insignificance by James Clammer. Here he is. This is an incredible, amazing book that we were lucky enough to do with our friends in Gallibagger, with Gallibagger Press over in the UK. This is the North American edition. It is, as of this moment, 7:03 p.m. in Toronto, which means it's past midnight in London, where James is. And there's the proof. So thank you, James, for staying up late. Before I kick things off, we're just going to do a quick land acknowledgement. Coach House is based in Toronto, so I'm going to read our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So, Insignificance, the novel. Often labeled as a plumber's Mrs. Dalloway, about the one day in the life of a plumber, a very, very bad day, as first day back on the job after a leave of absence. And this also includes some of the most beautiful descriptions of changing a water heater I've ever read. So we are going to bring James on to do a reading and talk a bit about the book. But before we do that, we have another book to celebrate that's out today as well, Masses on Radar by David O'Meara. Just a fantastic collection of poetry by one of Ottawa's, if not the country's, best poets. We're going to bring David on. He's going to read some poems. Then he's going to come back. He's going to introduce Jim. I'm calling him Jim. We're friends now. He's going to introduce Jim. Jim's going to maybe give us a reading, maybe talk about the book a bit, and then David and Jim are going to have a talk. So I'd like to introduce David O'Meara. He has one of the shortest biographies you've ever heard of in this book. It says David O'Meara lives in Ottawa, Canada. I'll embellish on it slightly because he is the past author of A Pretty Sight, which was also put out by Coach House Books. And he's the past or founding artistic director of Verse Fest Canada. He's also a past winner of the Archibald Latman Prize. So that's not nothing. And his new book, Masses on Radar, which is absolutely brilliant collection of poetry, is out today. Everyone, please welcome David O'Meara.
Thanks, James. Yes, my mute is off. I don't have to be told that you're on mute. Thank you for hosting this event, and I'm really pleased to be part of James Clammer's book launch on our publication day. It's a wonderful read, but I'll get to that in a few moments. So I'm just going to do a short reading. I'll read a few poems from the book, and then we'll get to James's wonderful prose. So without further ado, I'm going to start. Seeing as the theme is sort of work for this event, I'm going to start with the poem Workroom, which is sort of a snapshot of a possible day of mine. The wire fence, the shrub, the edge of the rock garden seep through soft snow like developing Polaroids. Out my workroom window, the shed looks picturesque and weighted. The Queensway is hell. Rush hour starts at 2:30. Buzzing the guardrails, brake lights don't dazzle, but drip like IVs into the long coma of Canada. A green stack, masses on radar. Folk music laments dead animals. Unshaven, I type and delete, push the lines together, hoping for friction, a habanero heat, a Hail Mary of dynamite. It's usually domestic, the afternoon's dishes. The dentist warns, but my teeth grind all night. The brain won't stop. feet feeling for the stairwell. Moonlight silvers its rented white walls. A number of the poems in this book are 14 lines, which was the case with that one. I'm going to read another one that's about travel, but I think also it's about distance and time, or the distance of time, which really is what every poem is about. It's called Days. We keep forgetting something back there, don't we? We pop out the door, turn corners, the shop's unchanged, but data nags like a black box has signaled from the wreckage, or a high voice is calling down a long street across medians of statued piazzas, river bends, concert halls, vertigo in the nosebleeds, barista beardos at homogeneous counters, X-rayed luggage, passport please, carousel fatigue, caffeinated reveries in taxis, the balcony's very non-sea view, our frugal mattress picnics, watching own goals in stoppage time, the must-sees we didn't, phone calls, emails, our returns, fine-toothing of apartment vacancies, with thoughts that nothing would change, as if we'd rush back through traffic across 3 continents, a decade, to find my father still alive, the cat at its bowl, and the iron left on. This next poem was inspired by, I came across a really beautiful and haunting photo essay by a Russian photographer. What was her name? Evgenia Arbugeva. Forgive me, Evgenia, if I've not said your name right. About this soul figure who mans a weather station on the Barents Sea, whose last name is Korotký. And this poem is, the photo essay, I think, is really about solitude, as is the poem. And I sort of started imagining myself replacing Korotký there. So this goes out to all my friends who think I would be a good lighthouse keeper. It's called Where is it? I replaced Korotký at the weather station on the Barents Sea. It will stay like this, filigreed with frost, windows brim in each retina. They glom on mute noon's plum horizon above snow and shelf edge. It glows to Svalbard, gets gray with no foghorn. Purse seine, pelagic trawl, bejeweled with an auroral side ridge, capelin spawn in shore sand, flaunt larval drift and a catch rule. Alone is only no one else now. Near grass flats, I float a dory punched with rivets and scrape mud from treads on the bucktails, bunched collar in my fist, puffing the balance of a tobacco ration. Now I row, no oarlock and prepared for leg, a scruffy speck lording over the landspit. On duckboards of permafrost across sedge and tundra grass, in hip boots, I heave a tidal marker to shore. Bergs stall in the opal monochrome. It stays like so, all squint and radar. January gusts spanking the back window. I write my life is wind and post the note to nowhere until summer supply ship swans through sea ice. Everything accrues. I didn't come here hoping. I called for certain information. The snow squall hallucinates me. Its horizontal crosshatch of low pressure flails over kindling, a shovel, dog grave in a dark barn, riding out the epoch. And I'll just finish with a poem that I'll read for James on his pub day. This poem is ultimately about household maintenance. And anyone who hasn't read James's book yet will appreciate why in a few minutes. This is called Vigor. Contra the self-help guide, sweat the small stuff and don't think outside the box. Think inside the house. It's brick and Tyvek wrap, double glazed windows, screen doors and gable flashing. How it shelters our life needs steady vigor with mop, baking soda, vinegar, hard bristles, J-cloth, dustpan, Dyson, and in special cases, tongue oil, caulking, or plunger. Through the hardware store's turnstiles, you're always forgetting something. Exit, pursued by a toilet brush. Meanwhile, back at the sty, a Roomba's let loose in the living room, ramming baseboard with puny rushes, a feeble vision of the future, proof our domestic AI is no Rutger Hauer. Soon to be laughed at, but grimly muttering, I've seen cat hair you people wouldn't believe, into the dustbin of, like, literally, the kitchen. All right, now on to James. James was just a quick bio that James was born in Bristol, grew up in East Anglia, and now lives in Sussex, England, where it is now past midnight, has been noted. This might add some added atmosphere to his reading, perhaps, especially if he is in the shed at the bottom of a cliff, which I'm informed where he writes. James's first novel, called Why I Went Back, which is a work of YA fiction, was nominated for the Carnegie Medal and longlisted for the Brantford Boese Award. His new book, Insignificance, the novel is totally fantastic. I was enthralled reading it. It's a wonderful read for a number of reasons, partly for its nuanced explorations of family, faith, mental illness, violence, and flawed repair, both psychological and also maintenance for household plumbing. The pleasures of reading this life in a day modernist deviation of third-person stream of consciousness might arise from its sentences, which are rich, full of inner music, coupled with a sophisticated narrative drift. And don't let me bore you with that. I just simply say that it's also full of tension. It's such a compelling story. It has more tension than a fistfight on a guy wire. Please welcome James Clammer.
Well, thank you, David. That's a great introduction. And I should also say that repay the compliment to your wonderful collection of poetry. And I love your line, exit pursued by a toilet brush, because in my plumbing career, I've had a few sticky situations, let's say that. Okay, so let's get on to the book, which is called Insignificance. Okay, so this is it, and this is the Coach House version. And first of all, I want to thank James and Alana and Crystal for the fantastic job they've done on the book, and Gladys the Goose, of course. I don't know if she cut the paper. I don't know. It's a wonderful job, and I'm so pleased to be published by Coach House. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read an excerpt that's towards the end of the book. And the protagonist of the story is a man called Joseph. And where we join him, he's had rather an unpleasant day. He's had a traumatic encounter with his son, who he thought was in prison. And he pretty sure that his wife, who's called Alison, is going to leave him. It's a long, hot summer's day, and to relieve the pressure, he's decided to go out and get drunk, which is a very good English tradition, and probably is in Canada too. Now, what you need to know to understand this passage is that he's carrying a bag with him. And inside this bag, there's a bottle of whiskey and there's a knife. The bottle is just a bottle of whiskey. Everybody's seen one of those, but the knife is special. Now, although this book is ostensibly about a day in the life of our character Joseph, there's quite a few other themes and threads running through it. And one of those is the British Empire, that project of genocide, racism, and exploitation, whose historical legacy we, by which I mean we in the United Kingdom, have utterly failed to confront. To our shame, I should add. This empire has had many myths, and many of the stories involved in it that have turned into legends. And one of those is the Siege of Khartoum in 1885 and the death of General Gordon. And by a twist of fate, the knife that our character Joseph is carrying was used in that very siege. And I have, because I found we're doing these Zoom events, that having a little visual aid helps. I have a picture of the knife, and I'm going to try and hold it up with the minimum amount of glare. So what we've got is we've got a three, well, you can see for yourself what we've got. The case is made out of crocodile skin, and the blades are made out of iron. Here's another picture of the blades, and they're etched with acid, and the inscriptions on them are called tulaf in Arabic. I think that's how you say them. I actually held this knife in my hand a few years ago, which is another story. So basically, at this point of the story, what you need to know is that Joseph's upset, he's drunk, and he's carrying quite a dangerous knife, which I'm sure we can all agree is not a happy combination. And I should also add that in humble tribute to my publishers, I've changed a couple of lines in this script, and that will be obvious. Welcome to it. Soon Joseph reached the outskirts of town. Where had the miles gone? Nowhere. The place wasn't that big. Here we find him altered once more. How his moods change. They're like the proverbial shifting sands. Where's the good guiding twine of common sense that each of us plucks at from the moment we leave the amniotic pool? It looks as if it's been loosened catastrophically. Witness the way he's staggering this way and that, almost into the road itself. Mouthfuls of whiskey have been sucked down. Well, what's there to go back for? An empty house, or a house occupied by someone to whom he's become a figure of marginal interest. However much his wife, Alison, might protest, Joseph knows the truth. Besides, look at these skies. There's something. Real cloud kingdoms of infinite type, streets and staircases picked out in orange and pink, cloud harbours, cloud ships, so slowly they move. Why not keep going towards them? No loyal friend appeared to take Joseph by the shoulders and shake some sense into him. No brisk voice ordered him return to home fires. Unexpectedly, we discover ourselves here, recalling one of the most memorable scenes in all of English literature. An animal named Mole, whose heart has been set aflame by the whisperings of a foreign voice, is intercepted and turned back on his newly adventurous heels by a fellow creature named Rat. No need to go poking about abroad, old chap. Stay at home. It's all here. The world comes to us. Long have we prayed that no weasel playing truant from its frozen and inadequate tree root shelter goes leaving a hole in the bottom of Mr. Rat's boat one fine spring morning. Joseph, in other words, was walking rather than going for a walk. The two are different. One implies no retracing of footsteps. Now, looking down, he saw to his surprise that the pavement had disappeared, and in its place was grass verge, withered and dusty from heat and the chemical outpourings of motor vehicles it might be, but to his mind it was pleasant, always slab or concrete underfoot. And he liked this staggering about, like a tramp. It gave him a thrill. So what if it was adolescent? The looks he was getting from the drivers of the cars as they went by, the outrage, the indignation. It had been a long day for them, and now he was some drunken idiot swaying into the road. What a loser. Somebody better call the police. It's only a matter of time till he causes an accident. Ostentatiously, Joseph swung the bottle of whiskey, the brown grouse on the label blurred. The edges of many visible things had acquired a profound glow from the dying summer evening. His mind, by turns, was supple and jingling. The canvas bag that slapped at his side was exciting too, and what a gift inside the knife. How magnificent it was, how menacing. Imagine bursting into Alison's study group and waving it around. Real Old Testament stuff. Yes, the first thing he'd do tomorrow will be set about reclaiming his wife from those bastard Bible bashers. He could see now he'd been too timid about everything. The problem was these second thoughts, third thoughts, fourth thoughts that foamed around every subject his brain considered. They were no good because each brought in their wake their own second, third and fourth thoughts until before you knew it, you were swamped, confused, totally lost. Cars flashed out of the sun like golden chariots. Each car dumped on him its parcel of hotness. The verge became thick and overgrown until he was having to labour through it. From a clump of arrowgrass, he snatched handfuls of darts and pelted the cars. Close by, a horn sounded and a driver thrust out a middle finger. Beneath Joseph's feet, the ground was rising, becoming an embankment, which meant he'd soon be on the bypass. Here were tall grasses flopped from the heat, thistles, tiny pink flowers, tiny blue flowers. They were beautiful. He stared at them. He wanted to remember them. Briefly, he saw over the crest of the embankment a straggled hedgerow and a dirt track on the other side. And then his foot snagged in a hole, balance gone, tumble, and he was down at the bottom again. What a ride, but he'd lost nothing. The whiskey had rolled safely down too. Lucky the cap was screwed on properly. You nearly made me crash, said a voice. A little way down the road, a car had pulled in and a man was getting out. Already the traffic had backed up. Those who wanted to continue their journey would have to navigate this new obstacle. They would have to cross the white line and drive partially on the other side. Again, the man spoke. He was striding towards Joseph. What do you think you're doing? Joseph shrugged. How to respond? He'd fallen down a grassy bank. That much should be obvious to everyone. My girlfriend's in there, said the man, jerking his thumb back at the car that had pulled in. What? Said Joseph. Can't she take care of herself? He failed entirely to understand what the presence or otherwise of this man's girlfriend had to do with anything. Don't insult a lady, replied the man. Come on, you're coming with me. What? Into the car. I'm taking you to the police. I've had it with your sort. What sort? What are you talking about? The man was large. His limbs were thick. The red maple leaf t-shirt he wore commanded people to visit Toronto. A pizza-sized hand grabbed Joseph by the throat. Get off me, Joseph said. He slapped the man's pizza-sized hand till somehow it dislodged. Then he tried to walk off along the verge, but the man was coming after him. He caught Joseph's arm and shoved it up behind his back and tried to get him down on the ground. Joseph scrambled away just in time. He broke into a run. He was sobering up fast. "Don't let him escape, Robbie!" cried a woman's voice. "Call the police," shouted the man. "He's resisting." In the road, the traffic was moving once more. Those drivers who'd been stuck had found some means of negotiating the obstacle. How ingenious are the ways of travellers. We're glad they'll get home on time. But the man was not giving up his pursuit of Joseph. Possibly he remembered the famous Canadian motto, "A Mountie always gets his man." Both of them were now struggling up the knotted grass of the embankment. Joseph slightly higher. There was nothing else for it. He turned and pulled out the Marley's knife. This baby. The crocodile skin handle. The 3 pineapple top blades, once carried in the siege of Khartoum, here it was being used against an Englishman again. Seeing it, the man's eyes widened. He took a step back. To right and left, Joseph swiped the murderous implement. This was a power trip, all right. It gave him the audacity to bear down on the retreating man and retrieve the bottle of whiskey from the place where it had landed. "He's got a knife!" screamed the man in disbelief. "Lindsay, are you filming this? Are you getting this?" "What?" shouted the woman in the car. "I said he's got a knife. Look at it. Are you getting this on your phone?" "Oh, Robbie, I told you the battery's gone." Steadily, Joseph backed up the bank. It was easier to do now that he needed to do it. And this time he didn't stop to look at the pink or blue flowers. At the top, he checked with a glance to see where was the best place to break through the straggly hedge and onto the dirt track. He stuffed bottle and knife into the canvas bag, clutched the bag to his chest, then ran, as he thought, like the wind.
Fantastic. Thank you, James. So I'm just going to launch right in here, I think. We'll have a little conversation, and then maybe James Lindsay can come in, and if there's any questions from our participants, viewers, we can switch over to that, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you, first of all, for including some, Canadian content in there with the Mountie motto, and it's always a pleasure also to hear an Englishman doing comical English voices. So, James, I don't need to. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that the thing is, we've all been to readings, haven't we, that are very, very boring. People drone on, and we all get bored. We've often been ball rigid. I'm sure that's an experience that everybody's had. And I just find if you can use a few extra techniques to get people more interested and alleviate their inevitable boredom, then so much the better. Well,
there's lots of dramatic set pieces in this book. I love how it's structured, actually, in that, as we've sort of discussed in the intros, and that it's sort of a life in the day in the life. It all takes place within one day of Joseph's life, but it encompasses a lot. It encompasses a lot of the past, and it starts out with him just simply doing the plumbing job. But what I love about what you've been doing, what you do with the structure and the voice is what I mentioned in the intro, the narrative drift, the idea that he's engrossed in this immediate task at hand, and as is the case with anyone who is working through something they've done a million times, the mind wanders, and it usually wanders into the past. It wanders into something that is a concern of theirs. And then it switches into, I don't want to give too many spoilers here, but certain things that have happened in the past present themselves in a more immediate way. there's so many tensions in the book. You know, things like the breakdown, the situation with Joseph's son, his marriage, etc. Not to mention, you know, the knife, etc. It was one of the things that kicked the book off, you know, that you sent you into that narrative. Was there one particular thing?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, during the time that I was working as a plumber, which I don't do anymore, what I was aware of was that I was doing technical jobs that people had not tended to write about in literature. And I thought that if somehow I could manage to write it down in very great detail, which I did at the time just for my own satisfaction, if I could somehow integrate that into a dramatic structure, then that would be something that perhaps I'm not, you know, I'm not saying that nobody's ever done it before, but something that was perhaps a bit unusual. Then it took me a while to work out how to do that. Two of the things that kind of gave me more confidence, really, in the first third of the book, to focus on that technical thing, was first of all finding out that Thomas Pynchon had written technical manuals when he was starting off as a writer. And the second thing was reading several of Rudyard Kipling's stories where he personifies machines. He has an amazing story called The Ship That Found Itself, and each part of the ship, which is obviously a steamship, as it crosses the Atlantic, goes to New York, takes on a character. So all these things were going through my mind, and but that was only one part of it. So then I knew that that is interesting in itself, but that's not a story. You need a story, of course, and you need characters. So when I came across this idea of Capgras syndrome, which features in the life of Edward, who is Joseph's son, then that was another thing that clicked into place. And then another of my fascinations is religion. Although I'm an atheist, a lifelong atheist, I'm fascinated by the delusions or the illusions, whatever you want to call them. The psychologist Otto Rank would call them immortality ideologies that people really have to really buy into to give significance to their life. I've always found this very fascinating. So putting those three things together, the technical aspect and then the psychological aspect, which I knew back to front because I'd done it, and then the psychological aspect of Edward and the Capgras syndrome, and then the religious aspect, which affects Joseph's wife, Alison. I thought that was enough to get me going, and fortunately it worked.
Well, they're beautifully contrapuntal.
It's not up to me to say.
No, I was going to say they're beautifully contrapuntal because yes, you know, as a poet, I love industry speak, and because there's so many words that, you know, only plumbers will use, or only, you know, construction workers will use, or only chefs will use. And what's beautiful about those passages is you can revel in the language, and there's a real beauty in that kind of description. But it also, what I love is how it contributes to the structure of the story, because it's a form of delay. You know, we're following this plumber doing the job, but then the story starts to drift in, certain things get dropped, and it, you know, that adds a real tension that piques the reader. Are you a plotter, or are you more organic writer? Did you kind of work out what was going to happen, or did you just start with the character and follow along with, you know, what was happening at the moment?
Well, just to before I answer that, just to touch on your thing, this is another thing that sort of bugs me really about modern literature is, do we, you know, I'm not pointing the finger at anybody, but do we really need another 100 books about middle-class academic lifestyles, or middle-class, this, that, and the other, that, because once you get into that world, I think it's very easy to lose a sense of specificity. I haven't said that right. And to really, become much more vague. And to me, it's those authentic details that can really anchor a book down and make it work. In answer to your, so what I was trying to do was I was trying to do something that, I was trying to bring something out that, not many other people seem to have done or be interested in doing. And I absolutely did revel in the language. And I revel, for example, in using terms that I knew nobody would use, but of course plumbers use them all the time. In answer to your to answer your question, yes, I am a bit of a plotter. There is quite a strong 3-act structure in the book. I tried my best to be as concise as I can, because I'm sure we've all had that experience of reading books that go on too long. And you think, if only they'd finished it 50 pages earlier, how much stronger would it have been? I wanted to try not to fall into that trap if possible. It's a kind of dialectical process, really, for me, David. I mean, in the dialogue, I go on about this a lot, this process of dialectic, how you have your thesis, your antithesis, and your synthesis, but how they always build it on one level. So, on one hand, you have the characters. On the other hand, you have the plot and the need to move the story forward, and those work in a kind of, the idea is that they work in a kind of dialectical way, and that you come up with something, worthwhile at the end. But I certainly didn't neglect the aspect of plotting, which I think is sneered at in certain quarters, unjustifiably so, I think. I think it's very important to give people a proper structure and not to proliferate characters if it's unnecessary. And of course, if you don't proliferate characters, what that enables you to do is it enables you to dig deeper down into the strata of those characters that you do have. So then that starts opening up, and that can take you into all sorts of places. But as you yourself know, being a poet, it's all really a voyage of discovery. It's already hit and hope, and there was a lot of that too.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering if you plotted it out. Obviously, there's some psychological things that are happening with the characters. Were you surprised by anything? Did something, pop up that you weren't expecting to happen in the story without, maybe spoilers?
Well, now this is a very interesting point. Things didn't necessarily pop up, but certain correspondences started occurring that I thought, I know this is working now. So, for example, there were just little coincidences, like I would read a story that was connected to a plot point, and I could immediately see how it was relevant, or some other bit of writing that I'd done, it found its way in. Somehow, it all just seemed to gel. There were one or two surprising moments, but by and large, I mean, you're the creator, and you have responsibility for the final product, and you can't let it get too off the rails, because you have to keep control of it. So it's all give and take. It's all give and take, as I'm sure you know yourself.
So when you say there were correspondences that sort of surprised you, more on a psychological level rather than a plot level?
Yes. Although now I struggle to think of it, now that you've asked me the question directly, I struggle to think of any. But all the time when you're working on this sort of intensity, just everything's feeding into it, you know. And so things can come from almost anywhere, just conversations you have in the street, little things you hear, little things you see, little things that you observe, and it all goes into the mix. And I think if you're disciplined enough, which I hope I was with this book, then it works out. For example, towards the end, there's a quote from a novel by Graham Greene about plumbers, and I'm a big Graham Greene fan. I originally read that book, The Heart of the Matter, when I was working as a plumber, and it's one of the few times I didn't actually do it, but the story would be better if I said that I threw it across the room. I've never actually done that, but I was absolutely furious. Graham Greene's a fascinating guy, but a terrible snob. And I stored that away in my memory bank for many years. And then as I was writing the book, I then tried to find every single literary reference to plumbers that I could find, which are not very many. The few and far between. The only other one I could find, one of the other ones I found was in John Webster, The White Devil. Or is it The White Devils? I forget now. It feels like plumber is laying pipes in my guts. This is as the Jacobean hero is poisoned and run through at the end of the revenge tragedy. So, you know, I had to get that in as well. So yeah, everything just went in on the mix. But when you get on the wavelength, when you're really, really focusing, which takes a lot of energy and doesn't happen very often, and you feel very fortunate when you do, the little happy little serendipitous accidents happen that lead you to think this is working. And fortunately, I had a few of those with this book.
Well, I saw the references to The Heart of the Matter, connected to Alison, Joseph's wife's, and his, to some degree, struggle with faith. I mean, Graham Greene was a great Catholic, but, you know, he certainly struggled with his own faith. And I thought it was a bit of a nod to Alison's particular solution to the dramatic situation that she and her family and they had found themselves with Edward to some degree. A kind of solution, a way of dealing with it. Would you say so?
Yeah, well, the tragedy about the tragedy about Joseph at the end is that his wife is about to leave him, and his wife is completely bought into Christianity. She's kind of born again Christian, and that's her belief. That's her immortality system. That's what she's banking on that is going to work. And Joseph can't bring himself to do that, and as a result, he's left with nothing. He's left with his own insignificance, and that's a pretty hard place to be. And it's a hard place for anyone who doesn't really believe in religion like myself to find themselves in. So I was trying to bring those two counterposing points out at the end. If you're lucky enough to believe in Christian,
well, let me raise. Let me raise the question of the title of the novel. Yes. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that, you know, calling your book Insignificance is setting yourself up for trouble with the critics. This is coming from a guy who wrote a play called Disaster. What did the title, you know, signify for you? Why did you decide that was where you wanted it to go?
Well, the actual reason why I called it that was after reading an article by a woman called Karen Armstrong, who I'm a big reader of her books. I don't know if you've come across her. She's Britain's kind of greatest leading religious authority. She's got a fascinating career. And she wrote an article in the newspaper. What she was trying to explain was, why do people, young men by and large, why are they going to Afghanistan or to Syria to fight the jihad? These Muslims. And she was saying because it gives significance to their lives. It would otherwise be insignificance. That would otherwise, I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to stay and work in a phone shop for the rest of your life? Or are you going to, I'm not defending it, of course, you know, but by buying into these religious systems, and of course it happens the same with politics as well, and art and all sorts of things, and science, you're buying into something much larger than yourself. And you hope that, you know, it will give you some kind of immortality beyond your own inevitable death. So the actual word insignificance came from that article. But I have a secret plan, David, which I'm now going to reveal to you, which I haven't revealed to anybody, actually, not a Coach House anyway. But my plan now is to every novel I write, if I can write another one, because they're not very easy to write, they're extremely difficult to write. But the next one is going to be, I've got a plan to do, everyone is going to be in word. So the next one, if I can write it, if I can finish it off to the standard that I want to finish it off, it's going to be called incubation. And then there's going to be a whole bunch of other after that. That's the plan.
Well, I'll say this about the title, and then maybe I'll pass it on to Mr. James Lindsay, who might have some questions from our participants. But I found the title interesting because by calling it something like that, you're constantly assessing what's happening in the story, with, you know, where that falls on the scale, I guess, with what is significant. And, you know, you go from the mundane sort of workaday situation that Joseph's going through to all these extraordinary things that, of course, everyone goes through, you know, no matter what walk of life they're in. We all have dramatic moments in our lives that we have to consider, and we have to consider the significance of. And so I just found it a good counterpoint to the events of the book and how you play it out throughout.
Yeah, in terms of your question, I haven't had any critical panning for the title of the book. One of the other things, actually, just quickly, that you mentioned, one of the very things that I'm interested in as well is that I'm interested in physics as well. So one of the things in physics is this theory. They have a theory of everything. Okay, so what's the theory of everything? It's how you get the you know, Einstein's theory of cosmology, in his theories of relativity, to work with the tiny quantum world that we're told exists. And the proof is there. Okay, so you have the very microscopic, and then you have the very macroscopic, the cosmological. Yeah. So one technique I've really tried to pay attention to, one technique that I try to pay attention to is really trying to concentrate on both those things. So you have to have the cosmological thing, you have to have the overall story, but at the same time, we want to get that kind of really kind of grainy micro detail of what it's really like to, you know, be alive in that moment. And in Joseph's case, it's not very pleasant for most of the book. But if you can capture that, and then that's you know, that's a good thing to put in a book, because not everybody is interested in that.
Yeah, for sure. No. Going on to Mr. Lindsay, I see there he is. Hi.
Hello. Hi, guys. Thank you so much. That was a great conversation. I know we have a bit of a crowd, so I will ask anyone who's attending tonight, if you feel free to drop a question into the Q&A box. I might get us started off. James,
no questions so far.
No questions.
No flood of questions.
No further. I have one, if that's okay, and then maybe one for David, actually. But James, one of the things I always thought was so interesting is when you talked about how part of the inspiration for this book was wanting to include the world of work in literature. And in another interview, I also remember you saying that you feel as if literature itself has been kept away from working people too, and told as if it was above their heads and something that was unavailable to them. So I think it's really interesting that both working class people have been kept out of literature and literature has been kept away from working class people. I was wondering if you could comment a bit more on that, or maybe.
Yes, well, I've said this in several of my interviews, is that why I got into this was because I was actually very ill as a child. I spent a lot of time in hospital. And of course, this was many years ago before the internet. And there was nothing to do except read. I had nothing to do. And I started off, first of all, reading American comics, which were fantastic. And I'm still a huge fan of comics and graphic novels. But then I progressed onto books. And then I kept reading these books. I'm reading, like D.H. Lawrence. I'm reading Evil in War. I'm reading the classics, and the world of work just never comes up in them. And I think and I'm thinking age, 18, 19. I'm thinking, how did these guys become writers? Because they never seem to do any proper work, not as I understand it. What's going on? And it took me a long time to find other writers that mention work at all. James Clammer is one of my heroes, a writer from Glasgow in Scotland. And by and large, the world of work has not been put into literature because those people who have had the time to pursue literature have not had such great money worries as people who have to go out and do manual labor or that sort of stuff. It's left a huge hole, in my opinion, in the experience of literature as it's presented to us and as we find it, it really took me a long time to figure this out, and which is why I was very keen to put as much work detail in as possible. Working class people have been marginalised from literature, but they've also have a lack of confidence in some cases marginalised themselves. I always remember coming back on the bus from work one day, and I was only about 19, and I was reading Brideshead Revisited by Evil in War. And somebody that I work with said, "Oh, you're a fucking intellectual, aren't you?" Reading that. And I was like, "No, I'm just interested, But people push it away because they're not comfortable with it, and they don't understand it, or they think they don't understand it. And it's a shame because they're missing out on a lot. And if you can bridge that gap in any way, then that's something that I'm very interested in doing, definitely.
David, one of the things that struck me most about your collection, your new collection here, published today from Coach House Books, Masses on Radar, is the titling in it. I think obviously it's a personal collection, but there's so many poems in here that start with I. There's, I invited bad luck and ruin. I carry a mouse to the park beside the highway. I don't want the cat to be afraid. And I love it. Like it's such an interesting technique you use throughout it. I wonder if you could comment on that. Are these poems connected at all? Or where did the technique come from? Where was the idea?
Thanks, James. It was sort of a strategy. How it all started actually was with the last poem in the book. I sell cheap flowers by the roadside. I hadn't written a poem for a while, and I didn't want to write the same kind of poems that I'd written in the past. So it sort of came out of, was certain things happening in my life, and to make a long story short, I was passing by this guy who was in the middle of winter selling flowers by the roadside on this miserable day. And I kind of thought, oh, this guy, whatever I'm going through, this guy's certainly going through a miserable situation as well. It was like sleet coming down, etc. Anyway, I just thought I would write it in kind of a persona, but it's sort of a half hidden persona because I was trying to capture an emotion. And it went from there. And so the Karotki poem I read is another example where it was placing myself in a narrative that wasn't necessarily mine, but was placing myself inside an emotion that would capture something. So it was a bit of a cheating thing, but it was a strategy to get myself out of my own voice and do something. And then it evolved into, there's certainly poems in the book that the I poems that are more direct experience. But it was just kind of a strategy to write differently. And the other thing about those poems is they're all sequences. They're all broken up by sections. So it was also a strategy to not write a narrative poem, not tell a story necessarily, but lean more towards the lyrical end of the poem. And that's sort of where those poems came from. Yeah.
Thank you. We actually have one more question for David too. This one is from Jane McDonald. Jane says, in a novel, as James Clammer is saying so clearly, the subject is almost everything. The working life is being left out of novels in the case in point. But for poems, what is the function or how important is the subject?
Wow, that's a big question. And I think that pertains to novels too. It can vary. I mean, I think as an artist, you're doing whatever you can to say something interesting, something new, something fresh, and something honest. And if you can do it in a voice that's from your own perspective, great. But sometimes you need to lean on other voices or a fictional version of yourself in order to get at some kind of a truth. It's really just a question of finding a way to say something that you want to say, and you rely on whatever strategy you can, because your own experience is not all encompassing and interesting in some cases. And I think maybe James can speak to that too, right? In a fictional level.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you have to, the masks change, don't they, all the time? It is a big question. I'm not quite sure how to answer it. It's a very slippery business, writing. You don't really write as yourself all the time. You just you're constantly slipping in and out of other ideas, other voices, other things that you've read. And what I find is that happens mostly at the draft stage, the first or second draft stage, and then once you have something that you're more or less happy with, then you have to kind of centralize it a bit. You have to impose exactly what you want on it if you can. But yeah, a lot of it's an experiment, and this is why it takes so long to write these things, because you experiment and half the stuff has to go in the bin because it's just rubbish. And that's a problem. It's a mug's game. It really is, in my opinion. But we're all mugs.
I don't know if that answered the question, Jane, but
it's a solitary life.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
I didn't want to end it on such a bleak note because I don't necessarily, it's supposed to be a celebration of two incredible books, but thank you very much, both of you, for coming. James, thank you for staying up late.
Listen, it's been my pleasure. I just wanted to say actually as well, David, your poetry is wonderful. And I wonder if you've ever come across the Polish poet, Zbigniew Herbert. Have you ever come across him?
Oh, yes.
He's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah, so am I. Wonderful, wonderful poet.
I can't wait till we're traveling overseas again so we can start having these conversations not on screen.
Yes.
But
well, I really want to come to your Way Goose event and get drunk on cheap beer. But, well, it's not going to happen, is it? So
not this year, Jim, no, but I promise to invite you to the next Waste Goose.
Well, definitely invite me. It is a bit of a way to come for a drunken night out, but but hey, you know, I'm middle-aged and I'm desperate.
There are other things to do in Toronto too, so you could make it a whole trip if you wanted. So,
yeah, well.
But thank you both for coming out. I want to mention before we go that speaking of in-person events, David's in-person launch for Masses on Radar is this Sunday in Ottawa at Spark Beer at 702 Somerset Street West in Ottawa. It's going to be starting about 5:30. Is that right, David?
That's right. I think 5:30, and we'll start the live streaming at 5:45 on the nose.
That's right. It'll be streamed on Coach House's Instagram, so you'll be able to catch it.
Instagram, right?
Yeah, you can check out David's poetry and see what an Ottawa bar looks like. Anyways, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you, James. Congratulations on your brilliant new novel, Insignificance.
Thank you.
It's wonderful.
Coach House Books. And David, Masses on Radar, out today. Thank you both so much for coming. It was a pleasure to talk with you and to listen to you guys talk.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.